Hi, I'm Sunny. I'm Sonlight's community manager and a Sonlight mom of 2 children who have been homeschooled since preschool with Sonlight. And joining me today are Jen and Sheila, and we are going to be talking all about how to kick your school year off right. So whatever steps you need to take to have a successful year and get started on the right foot, we're going to be sharing that with you. Jen, you're on the top of my screen. Do you want to say hello and tell us maybe your favorite way to kick off a homeschool year?
Sure. I'm Jen. And my favorite way to kick off the homeschool year is with a field trip.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being here. Sheila, what about you?
Hi, I'm Sheila, and I'm a veteran homeschool mom of 3. The favorite way that I would start the school year for myself was to have a teacher planning day.
Well, perfect. Yeah. And for me, I kind of just like to make sure that I'm organized. And then Sunday night, a few hours before my first day, I review everything and kind of make sure I'm ready to go. But you'll find the longer you homeschool with Sonlight, the easier it gets to just open and go. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's start maybe with something for the new to homeschool crowd or the new to Sonlight crowd, if they're not used to using Sonlight before. How do we handle record keeping, homeschool laws, making sure that we're doing everything we need to legally homeschool?
Well, I've homeschooled in a couple of states, and so the homeschool laws are different in each state. So the first thing that I always did was make sure that I was familiar with what I was required to do. Not just, oh, somebody said it's really easy, but like look up the actual state law. It is online in writing. And probably hook up with a state homeschool organization just so that I can see if they have any form templates that I can use or tips or anything like that. And then make sure that I had everything done exactly as required by the right dates. So if you have to declare your intent to homeschool or turn things in at the end or whatever, I needed to know what those dates were ahead of time.
Yeah, and I've only homeschooled in one state, and but I did all those same steps. I found out what my state organization was. I found out what the laws were. I'm very much a rule follower, so I want to make sure I know what those rules are so I can do the right thing and I don't get in trouble. And then I submitted my letter of intent, and I ordered my curriculum, and I started to figure out, systems. I would put systems in place. And I would tweak them over the years. So just because I started one way the very first year didn't mean that's the way I was going to do it from here on out. So that's one tip that I would say. Not only know what your law, what the law is for your state, but start small, jump in, and then you can tweak things along the way, especially as you learn from other people, whether online from the Sonlight Connections app, from your mentors, or from just local homeschool moms that you may meet at the park.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you both mentioned make sure you're familiar with the laws, because a lot of times people who are not homeschooling are not. And if they are homeschooling in a different state, they won't know necessarily what your laws are. I went to HSLDA when I decided to start homeschooling, that's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, to figure out who my state organization even was, because I had no idea what I needed to do. And then when I moved to a new state where the laws were totally different, I did it again and even reached out to that state organization to say, hey, I just want to make sure if I'm doing this, is this correct? And your state homeschool organizations, they're going to be able to answer all those questions and tell you what you need. Like Jen said, pay attention to dates. In the state of Colorado, where I am now, I have to submit records by a certain date annually. Otherwise, my entire year doesn't count. So depending on the regulation in your state, you want to make sure that you're aware of dates like that if you need it. I came from a state that was a very low regulation state before that. So once I registered one time, they didn't care what I did. They probably still think I'm homeschooling there, to be honest. But in my new state, there was a lot more regulation. So I had to pay attention to, okay, am I submitting things that I need to? I love using the Sonlight Instructor's Guide as my attendance record, though. I just write dates when we do things on there. And so it makes it very easy. And we'll dive more into that stuff as well. But Sonlight makes it easy with the scope and sequence if you need to report what you're doing or anything like that for your state. But just make sure that you are very familiar with what you're doing. And like these ladies have said, reach out, to other homeschoolers as well. They'll be able to help you out. So if it's a state where you need a portfolio or something and you're looking for ideas and suggestions, other people living in that state can help you. But let's talk about setting the expectations for the year. Sheila, you mentioned you're a rule follower. I definitely am as well. And so I know when I started homeschooling, it was like, okay, what are the rules to do this, or what do I need to follow? But as I've gone on longer, I've gotten more flexible in my approach to homeschooling. But how do we set those expectations for the year? How do we figure out what we need to do, what's nice to do, what we'd like to do, all of those different things?
Well, so when I first started homeschooling, I did start with Sonlight my very first year. I was very happy to have found them at a homeschool convention. But I do have an education degree. And so I kind of was going to recreate school in my home. I did not have the space to do like a whole classroom, but I had a corner of the living room with a small table, like a child-sized table and chairs. And I had put up an alphabet up on the wall. So I was, I wanted it to feel like school, and I wanted it to be special. So we would start our day every day with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we would also pray the Our Father, because I wanted my kids to learn some of those kind of classic prayers. And we didn't do that forever. I think I did that the first couple of years, and then I kind of got lax on some of that. And and once you know the pledge, and once you know the Our Father, okay, check, we've accomplished that. So it's okay to tweak things. It's okay to start one way and change things. But it is a good idea to establish some sort of routine. So whether you want to do Bible at breakfast, or, so that way you start the day off with devotionals, or if you want to start with your hardest subject, sometimes you get that hardest thing out of the way first, then everything else feels like you're coasting downhill. So whether you follow the instructor's guide line by line, you start with Bible, and then history, and then the read aloud, and then the reader, and then the language art. And like, if you follow it in that order, you can do that, but you don't have to. So some of it is just trial and error and what's going to work for you. It's a good idea to come up with some sort of routine and tweak it. Like, oh, it's better if I do history when the baby is napping, or do math in the morning while we're still wide awake and we've had our breakfast. So we have, our brain has fuel. But try different things. And then when it doesn't work, try something new, and maybe take some notes, like, oh, I tried this, that did not work, I'm going to try this. Or I talked to a friend and she says she does it this way, I'm going to try that and see if that works. And just give yourself grace, especially that first year. You are starting a brand new job. There's a huge learning curve, and you will figure out what works for you.
I kind of went the other way, and instead of thinking about the daily routine, I made a list of like, what were my priorities to accomplish this year? I want this one to be doing such and such a thing. And it wasn't even always all academic things, because especially in those little years, there's so much crossover between parenting and homeschooling. But I had long-term, like year-long goals, and that way I could break it down. And so when I felt like I was getting lost, it wasn't so much like reestablishing a routine in my house, but it was like, let's focus on what we're supposed to be doing. These are the things I said was important. So these are the things that we're going to make sure we do. And like Sunny said before, sometimes there are things that are like, and also maybe we could, if we have the time, the bandwidth, the space, whatever. But if I kept that list in front of me of what we were going to accomplish, then like the year stayed on track.
Yeah. And for me, when I started homeschooling, my daughter was only in preschool. So I didn't have a lot of expectations at that point. I thought, I'll do this for a year or two, and then you'll go to kindergarten and it won't matter. I can't mess you up at this age. And so which was actually very good. I think that I started like that because I did not have the pressure on. Also, we mentioned state laws earlier. A lot of states don't require you to register till the child's like 6. 7 sometimes. So if you've got a little, don't put huge pressure on, oh, my child's going to be reading and writing and all these things, especially if they're 3 or 4 years old. An older child, obviously, you've got a little more on along those lines, but it was actually Sonlight where I learned about Ruth Beechick, and reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's were kind of the main priority. And so those were the things that as my kids got older and got to where they were learning the academic things, and it wasn't just, you know, early learning skills, learning to sit still and stuff like that, that I was like, okay, if I can't get to all of my history today or all of my science today or something like that, I need to work on reading, writing, and math, because those skills build on each other. But I just kind of use the IG as my guide, the instructor's guide, and call it an IG. And I would just go through, and I, you know, early on did day 1 on day 1 and day 2 on day 2. And as my kids got older and I learned personality wise, you know, what worked better for them, now I really just kind of look at it and I'll say, okay, what subject do you want to do first? And if we're really into a history book or a read aloud, we might do 2 or 3 days worth of that book and check it off. And then we might skip something else in that day until the next day. So you do have a lot of flexibility. My goal is just, let's try to read all these books every year. That's really my main expectation. And I just want to see progress from the beginning of the year to the end. So I try not to hold too fast to, oh, you've got to be able to read this many words, or you've got to be finishing this math level. And I think these ladies would tell you the same. The longer you do it, the easier it gets to say, okay, it's not a big deal. We've got this. As long as we're seeing progress, that child's learning, which is what you want. But let's talk about organization and organizing all of these materials, because when you're using literature-based curriculum and there's a lot of books, you've got a lot of space constraints maybe that you wouldn't have if your program was online or just, you know, paper. So what are some ideas for getting organized, whether you have a large space or not, and then keeping track of your materials so that you're not misplacing things throughout the year?
Jen, I'll let you start first.
Okay. So Sonlight has those colored labels that come with every package, and those are hugely helpful, because if your kids are like my kids, they take books and then they run like forks and cups. You never see them again until they come out and you're like, I have done like 8 years of Sonlight. What is this book from? And if it has that little colored label on it, then you're like, oh yeah, that's green. So I know where that goes. Which ties right into my biggest organization tip for homeschooling, is to have a place for every single thing. If it lives in your home, it has a home. So the pencils go in the green cup, and little sister's books go on the bottom shelf, and your socks go in the top drawer. Everything in the house. Because if you are going to have multiple people live and work in your home 24/7, the stuff gets touched, it gets moved, right? Amen. And
Amen.
So if everybody knows where to put things back, it's so much easier to reboot than if you're like, I don't know, just put it on the table, because you say that 3 times and the table is 3 feet deep. So have a home for everything and use those colored labels.
Yeah, those labels, by the way, you can purchase on the website. They don't come with the curriculum, but they are really nice to have. They used to, they donate.
Sorry.
Ours did.
They're
Ours
like
did.
$3, so
We're old.
We're old.
Yeah. So my biggest tip for organization is reduce the clutter. The less stuff you have in your house, the more space you have to make room for your new materials. And you won't have all day to entertain your kids because they're going to be doing school. So it's okay if they have fewer toys. You can rotate toys. So if you don't want to actually get rid of them, just reduce what is out and put toys away. Put them on a top shelf in the closet, down in the basement, up in the attic, wherever you want to store things in the garage, and just rotate things out every couple of months. You can, you put the blocks away, you bring out the Duplos, and then you put the Duplos away and you bring out the blocks. So, you don't have everything out all at once, you rotate it. That will give your home some breathing room. It'll reduce the visual clutter, and it will provide space for you to shelve your books. It's a good idea to reduce the amount of stuff in your living room, like less knickknacks, more bookshelves, less stuff to dust, more bookshelves. And to designate, like Jen was saying, space for each individual child to put their things, whether it's a basket, a cubby, a shelf, under their bed, like wherever their stuff can live, because that way, if they leave it out, you can pick it up and put it away for them, or you can say before you're free to go play, you need to gather up your things and put them in your bucket, basket, shelf, whatever. So I think that is like kind of the biggest thing is if you can get organized up front, it will reduce the headaches later on, because you won't feel overwhelmed with just the visual stuff. Stuff won't get lost under piles of things, and if you put it away, then it's there the next day for you when you need your math book.
Absolutely.
Sheila, I completely agree. There are so many things that are in our houses that don't need to be, that maybe that's from a season that's over with, or you hate those pants and so you never wear them, but somehow they end up in the wash again, and so you have to deal with them, and all of those things want our attention. And so if you're going to spend a lot of time and attention on homeschooling, it's so much easier in an uncluttered house. And you can't organize clutter, it's just boxed clutter. And so like donate it, send it away, whatever it takes. But that is probably the best advice ever, is simplify everything else so that you have the time and the space and the square footage to homeschool.
Yeah, so along those lines, something that I do before I was using Sonlight, people would give my kids books for birthdays or whatever. We had a decent book collection, but once I started using Sonlight and they started outgrowing some of those board books and things, I started saying, don't give my kids books, because they were blowing through them so fast. They would get read once and then they would take up space. I was like, I've got all the books I need with my Sonlight. And I just started going to the library like every other day. So we check out a lot of books. We also, my older child has a Kindle where she can download books to it. And so really we are not hurting for books, even, beyond our Sonlight, but we do not physically keep the books in the house because I wanted to limit that just to our Sonlight books. Another thing I like to do is use your vertical spaces. We have two big IKEA Billy bookshelves that were relatively inexpensive, and they have height extenders on them. So I have them all the way to my ceiling. And currently we're holding preschool through 100. So you can get quite a bit of Sonlight. That includes science kits and a bunch of random things. I could probably get more books on there as well, just by using that vertical space. And it's maybe 7 or 8 feet wide. I'm looking because my bookshelves are over here off the camera, but it's probably 7 or 8 feet wide. So it doesn't really take up a lot of space width-wise, but it goes high. And if you don't have a room to put them in, you can still put those in your living room or a bedroom, and they're going to hold a lot of books. I also love what you guys said about each kid having their own area. I color code everything. So red folders, red binders, red notebooks, that's my son. Anything that's blue, that's my daughter. And so I can quickly see if somebody left something out on the table, I know who it belongs to. Or if I'm saying, hey, I need you to go grab your notebook. Oh, let's see, it's not over here. Let's go find where it is. So that way you can easily help your kids identify what they need for school as well. And then finally, something that I got from our Sonlight community was one of those rolling carts that you see that are really popular in the homeschool world, because we had a tendency to leave stuff on our dining room table, even though we have the bookshelves. It was like, oh, I got done working here, and somebody would walk away. And so because we have a kitchen island that we eat at, we didn't need the table to eat at. So it was just getting piled with school books. So I got a rolling cart that at the end of the day, everybody knows they can put their books on the cart, and then they roll it back in here to my office at the end of the day. So I don't have that in here right now, but each child has their own shelf, their school supplies on the third shelf, and it makes it very easy for them to go wherever they want to work. So look at your home and your space and what's going to work for your family. But I love what you guys said. I'm very much a minimalist. I love not having a lot of stuff because it does make it a lot easier to organize things. But let's talk about the actual teaching now of Sonlight. Let's say you've got your space figured out, you know where your books are going and where your binders are going. Can you actually just open and teach Sonlight without preparing a lot of things beforehand.
So I said at the top of the class here that I had a teacher planning day before school started. And that is where I would get out my instructor's guides and I would pre-read all of the introductory material with sticky notes and a highlighter and a pencil. And I would make notes to myself because especially your very first year, this is all new information. You don't know how we teach spelling. You don't know what dictation is and why we do it and all that stuff. So if you pre-read that information ahead of time and you highlight the things that you really want, like you're like, oh, I want to come back and remember this thing, then you can take your Cliff Notes version, and that way it will help you to remember once you do start on Monday or whatever, you know, what it is that you're doing. So I think like maybe by your third year of sunlighting, yes, you can literally open it up and go. But I think your first year and maybe even your second year, because your first year, you're just drinking from a fire hose. By your second year, you're drinking from a garden hose. And by your third year, you're just drinking from your water bottle. So, you know, it just gets easier and easier. But I would say your very first year, you will want to become familiar with where stuff is. There's a reader's guide at the end in the appendices of the instructor's guide. There are cutouts in the appendices of the instructor's guide. So like you need to be familiar with it. So it's good if you spend some time with the instructor's guide and know what the symbols are and all those things. And then next year, it'll be a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree. With some preparation, you can open and go. Like once you get into year 3, 4, 5, you absolutely, you know where the things are, you know how it's going to go. And so you can open and go. When I look at my instructor's guide in the very beginning and have that like teacher planning moment, my list is I put all the science supplies I'm going to need on my calendar, because I mean, I could have an apple in the house every day of the year, but I guarantee you when that experiment comes along, we will not have apples. And so I put those things on my list with little alarms like, hey, before you go grocery shopping, make sure you have these things that we're going to need. We need a wooden pencil. Well, that doesn't sound difficult, except I gave birth to mechanical pencil children. And so a wooden pencil is like a little more complicated than it sounds like. Very easy to come by, but only if I know that before I go to Target. And so, yeah, with a little prep, I can make it open and go, but it does take that little bit of preparation, I think, just like any job.
Yeah, Sheila mentioned that at the beginning, that when you start homeschooling, it's like starting a new job. You have that learning curve of how do I actually do this? And I absolutely agree. I encourage everybody, read those pages at the front of your instructor's guide. At least the first year, probably the second or third year, when you transition from middle school to high school and now your guides are different, reread it again. Just make sure that you understand. You guys talked about the symbols, like the timeline symbol or the little globe, or there's parent notes. There's a lot of good information that's covered in those first few pages of your instructor's guides that will tell you what everything means. And then also what the appendices in the back are for. Usually, I would say probably 95% of the time, when you're looking for something that's supposedly in your instructor's guide, it's probably there in one of those appendices and you just haven't looked for it. All that to say, now that I'm more than a decade into this, I'm usually building my IGs the first day of school now, because I know where everything goes and how it goes. And, you know, I used to line all the books up. Oh, tomorrow we're going to read these things, and I would line them up in order. And you really do not have to do that, especially after you've done maybe your first week of Sonlight. You're not going to need to do that. But if you have that personality where you just like to be organized and stuff, absolutely. A lot of our Sonlighters on like the Sunday night before the next week, they'll kind of review what they need to do. But if you're also a more laid back person, read your notes at the beginning, and then you're probably ready to rock and roll from there. But yeah, and of course, always come to the community. We see those questions all the time. You know, I can't find this, and it's somebody usually who hasn't read it in their instructor's guide. So again, that's not a super time consuming process either. I think some people are like, oh my gosh, this instructor's guide is 3 inches thick. This is going to be a big process. And it's really not. It's the first few pages at the beginning that will explain how to use it. And your first week of school has very thorough notes. And then after that, it lessens, you know, once you know what you're doing. So we talked about organization, and I think oftentimes when you start homeschooling, you see all these beautiful like Pinterest spaces and homeschool rooms and all of that. What, like using Sonlight specifically, what do you actually have to have? You mentioned science experiments earlier, Jen, but what else do you not have to have, but it's nice to have? I think about like your calendar, your letters, you know, when you're starting out in kindergarten or whatever. Do you need all of that stuff? What do you actually need to teach Sonlight?
Well, when you buy an all subjects package from Sonlight, you receive everything you need except for mechanical pencils or wooden pencils. So, I mean, you know, you might want to get some of those classic school supplies, scissors and pencils and maybe even crayons, but really you probably already have that anyway because you have kids. And so you just, you know, you really, I think the most important thing is to have the instructor's guide and to have the books. I know some people have tried to borrow books from the library, but do yourself a favor. This is your job. Have your tools for your job. Just get it. And then your year will go so much easier. But really, I think those are the most important things.
Yeah, I never had like a homeschool room. I'm so grateful that Pinterest did not exist when I started homeschooling, because I totally would have felt like I was doing it wrong. I have lived in some really small places. When my third child was born, we had about 700 square feet. I was homeschooling 2 kids at the time. We made it work. My kids do school at the table, on the couch, at the coffee table, under the kitchen table, on the front porch. It just, you know, we've done a lot of school hours in the car at a sibling's sports practice.
Mhm.
You know, could pack a bag and take books to an appointment or something that I knew was going to be boring and we were going to have to wait around. And so I would say like a good canvas tote bag is kind of one of those tools that really makes homeschooling easier. Sunny's looking around for hers.
I was saying, I know I had a Sonlight bag nearby. Yeah.
I mean, that is like when you need the right tool for the job, that canvas bag does a lot of legwork in homeschooling. I never had, I guess once we put like letters on the wall because my daughter, who was very artistic, was doing this like letter of the week project. And so like F had feathers and I don't know, B had bubbles or something. And so we ended up with the whole alphabet on the wall. And then she insisted it be kept up for a couple of years. But I mean, I never tried to recreate classroom school, and I felt like that was right for my family. But if you feel like the aesthetics of it are necessary or helpful for you, I mean, go for it. There's so much fun you can have with that. Is it technically necessary? I think no.
Yeah, I know families who would go down to the school resale depot in my town and buy desks. Like, you know, when schools get rid of their old desks because they get new stuff and then they sell stuff off. And so they would have like school desks in their home. I was like, no, this is not going to become part of our furniture. I did not have a room for a dedicated school room. And so, no, I was the same way. We did school at the table, the dining room table that served for everything. I mean, we actually eat at the dining room table as a family. So it had to get cleared off. We would do our couch subjects on our couch and the kids would play on the floor and play with their Legos while I was reading. On beautiful days, we might spread a quilt out in the backyard or go to the park or to the beach. But school gets work and then you can go play, you know, so school gets done. Sorry, school gets done and then you can go play. Work first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you guys said about being mobile, because I know, yeah, we do car school probably as much as we do homeschool, because you've got places to go with kids, or somebody has a lesson, or you've got to go somewhere. And so, yeah, I agree. Putting the books and a smaller binder in your tote bag, you can take it with you anywhere and to work. Also, I'm in technically my school room, but it's more my office. So you can see I have a dry erase board back here. I have the giant map. But the giant map was more of a design thing where I thought, oh, this would be cool in my office. It actually turned out handy for school too, but that was not the intention, because most of the time my kids are working in the living room, the kitchen, up in their bedrooms. I mean, we really do take that flexible approach to wherever. And this is more of the storage space / oh, I do need a dry erase board. I'm going to come in here and use that to figure out my math. But most of the time, yeah, the kids aren't actually doing school in this room.
Yeah, my dry erase board was in my kitchen for the longest time. Yeah, we remodeled the kitchen. I'm like, this thing's coming down.
Yeah.
My dry erase board is like a loose, it's probably 3 by 4 feet, but it's just a board and we slide it behind a bookshelf. But like that thing is mobile. Like there is no, I'm hanging it on the wall. Like we drag that sucker around the house. We do math.
Mine was like the size of Sunny's map. So it was big. I was not going to drag that thing around the house.
Yeah. I have those maps, but they're in my, like in our kind of kitchen family room. And we have a US map and a world map. And I thought like, this is the nerdiest thing ever. And we legit use those maps all the time. And if so the spine book that we're reading in J right now is this science book, but so they're working all over the world, and it'll say like in Zurich, and I can see his eyes. My son will look over my head at the map and like and I'm like, it's in the purple one in the middle, and like, so I don't know if it's technically necessary, but if I had to pick like 3 really important things to have, the a map big enough to be on the wall is definitely high on my list.
Yeah, I do love that. Yeah, because Sonlight does sell the one that folds, but I find that if it's not hanging, if I leave it folded, guess who doesn't unfold it? So Sheila, I know you had binder clips on yours, right? So you could hang that on the wall as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the things that you're going to use, maps, the timeline book, keep that handy, anything like that you're going to use every day, make sure that you keep it nearby. I have a little, it's like a lazy Susan that spins around for the school supplies, and that way I can carry that and put it wherever the kids are. And there's different pockets for the pencils and the crayons and things like that. But yeah, we just got very basic school supplies. I bought the big box of crayons, and then my children discovered colored pencils, and they no longer wanted the crayons anymore. So, look at how old your kids are and what they're going to need. But yeah, it's very basic. Simple school supplies are really all that you need. And then I do agree with you, Sheila, get the books. Your time is money. If you are having to go to the library and try to find books, or the book isn't available when you need it, or the book is not in the library, that's going to be a pretty big pain point, I think, for you. But if you've got the books on your or in your house already, on your shelf or in your closet, wherever you're storing stuff, and you can pull those books out right away, that makes it a lot easier for you. Also, I mentioned I have preschool through 100 out. Well, my youngest child's a 3rd grader. So why do I still have those books out? Because kids like to come back and reread them. And once your kids know how to read, that preschool book that you read to them when they're in 1st and 2nd grade is a great book for them to read when they're older. So that's another reason I like having the books.
Or if you have a friend come over and they have a little one, you can get your 3rd grader to go get that Bears book that you love and go read it to your new friend,
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it does still, keep books around so that, like you said, if somebody younger comes over, or I know that any child can walk into my house and there's probably a book at their level that can be read to them. So that's absolutely true. Anything else that you guys would like to share for getting ready for a school year, or things to make your school year better?
I planned like field trips and fun things, and sometimes to go with what we were learning in school, that was really easy when we did American history and we lived in the Northeast, because I mean, you can't skip, you know, Pennsylvania when you're studying American history. And if you live, you know, just a train ride away from downtown Philadelphia, it's pretty much criminal not to go when you're studying that stuff. It's the joy of homeschooling. But, you know, some years you're like studying ancient Egypt, and that would be really fun and not so much happening. But we went and did things anyway, and it broke up I mean, it's just like in a public school year, you have to break up the monotony sometimes. You know, everybody knows when the next day off is. And so I felt like if we planned those things and made it part of our plan, it really took a lot of the heaviness off of the schedule. Also, there is nothing as fun in the world as your local aquarium on a Tuesday morning in February. Nothing as fun. The place is empty. There will be 2 3-year-olds and their grandparents. You will be able to see everything. Your kids will have the run of the place. They'll be able to talk to the keepers who work there. So yeah, we planned those fun things purposefully.
Yeah, I loved having hands-on learning that brought things to life. When we did ancient Egypt, there was a King Tut exhibit 5 hours away, and we went. Like, I was like, oh, we are seeing the King Tut stuff. That is so cool. My husband had to work about an hour away, so I was like, make an appointment with whoever you got to Palm Beach. I'm going to drive down to Fort Lauderdale and take the kids and see this thing.
We saw that in Philadelphia.
Did you? Yeah, that was so cool. Yeah,
it was so cool.
Yeah, it was rotating. It was a traveling thing. So so take advantage of those kinds of things. I think it's so important to not be a lone ranger. You're not on your private island. Network, even as an introvert. I'm actually an introvert. I love people, but I'm an introvert. So, but it is so important to have a community. So if you live in a very small place where, you don't really know a lot of homeschoolers, we have an app. Sonlight has an app, and you can have a virtual community of other people who are doing things just like you, who believe things that you do. So there's that, but it's really good if you can find, in-person friends for yourself, for your kids, and then take advantage of what your town has to offer. Jen lives in the Northeast, so there's all kinds of stuff going on there. We ended up visiting a friend in DC and doing all the DC things. My husband ran the Boston Marathon one year, and we all went along because, oh my gosh, we're doing American history and we're going to do the Boston Trail, the Freedom Trail. But also, like, my parents live in Italy, and so we went to see the Colosseum, and we went to see the Blue Grotto, if you read Red Sails to Capri. So, like, everything can be a learning experience. But even if you live in the middle of the Midwest and there's not a whole lot going on nearby, you can still learn about corn and, prairies and wind and all kinds of things. So I would say, learning takes place outside of the classroom, outside of the books, and you will learn things in books that then you can apply when you're out and about. My kids really loved, in our town, we had a naturalist who would offer classes to homeschoolers during the day. And my kids got to touch all kinds of, snakes and things that I wouldn't want to handle, but they got to learn so much just exploring what was around us. So that's my encouragement, is like, school is not done at 2. It is a lifelong thing. My kids are grown now, and they still love to learn. They love to learn about things I don't care about, but they love to learn, and they pursue their own interests. And that was my biggest goal, was that, of course I want them to read and write and do math, but I knew that once they had that, they had the tools to be able to teach themselves whatever.
And for as many things as we went to see or do, because it correlated to what we were learning, I'm so jealous that you got to go to the Blue Grotto, by the way. That's on my bucket list. Thank you, Sonlight. There, a lot of times the funnest things we did were like whatever there was. My kids had an amazing tennis coach. Do I care about tennis? No, never played tennis. But she did homeschool classes, and everybody knew she was so fun and so encouraging. And she was just one of those people that you want in your kid's life. And so for several years, my older kids took tennis. And, now I live kind of on the edge of the country. And so we've gone to see Spanish galleons, and we've, seen the ships at Jamestown. And, and once you've seen one, then going to see a different kind is really interesting, because there's actually this historical track of technology that is why they built them differently and what they had at the time. And so once you've done it a couple of times, all of those things start to make connections in your kids' heads. And so it gets, sometimes just doing the thing that's where you are. If you have the, world's biggest ball of string, go see it.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah.
I grew up in Kansas, so yes,
That's a real thing.
Yeah, yeah. And we live near a lighthouse. And so we would have lighthouse classes, and the kids learn how to tie knots. And now my son's a rock climber, and he can tie all kinds of knots because we went to the lighthouse class, when he was in like 8 or 10 or whatever.
Yeah, and I love what you said about doing the things near you, because I think oftentimes we'll travel somewhere and we'll do all the really cool things where we're traveling, but we forget about all the really cool
Yes.
things where
Yes.
we live. And there's a ton of, so I live in Colorado, and there's a ton of history, and there's a ton of outdoor nature-y things, national parks, all of that. And when you've got a little boy that loves to dig in the dirt, even just taking him on a hike is great. But there's also museums all over and things like that that offer homeschool days. So Jen, you mentioned going to the aquarium when school is in session and there's like nobody there. That's a great time for homeschoolers to do that stuff. And I love, bringing in that fun, hands-on, bringing learning to life, right? That it's not just, oh, we read about this cool thing, but we don't actually get to see it. You get to see those places. If it's somewhere we can't go, so we were not going to Italy, but we got on YouTube and looked at videos of the Blue Grotto when we read that book, because I was like, oh, did you know this is a real place? And so we found, a more professionally done video, and then we found people on their vacations, just, with their camcorders in the boat. And so it was really cool for my kids to see that and, realize, oh, those places exist, even if we haven't gone to them. And maybe one day, I know when we were learning about ancient Egypt, my daughter fell in love with that time period. She's like, I want to go to the pyramids. And so that is now part of her travel bucket list, that someday, hopefully, she will get to go to the pyramids. So I think I love what you said, Sheila, about even if it's not something you're interested in, you can still encourage their interest. And, once they know how to learn, then they can learn anything. So absolutely, make it fun. Sonlight provides everything you need. I don't remember which one of you said that. They really do. It all comes in the box. I would not still be homeschooling today if they didn't provide everything for me, because I don't want to go find all those things. I want them just coming to me. So even for the hands-on now, Sonlight has a ton of hands-on opportunities in the hands-on history kits or the science experiments, lab books. So if you have a very hands-on learner, you don't even have to plan that stuff, which I love that as well. So ladies, thank you so much for being here today. Hopefully we've given people some ideas so that they can kick off their school year really well. But you both mentioned the community as well. If you're watching and you're starting a school year, with Sonlight for the first time, or you've been doing it for years, get into our Sonlight Connections community and you will get great ideas. I get great ideas from people all the time in our community. So that's our Sonlight Connections app, or our Sonlight Connections group on Facebook. Both places you'll have our Sonlight mentors, our other Sonlight families. And then if you need an advisor, you can also reach them there as well. So let us know if you need anything. And Jen and Sheila, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.